What happens when one of the world's most bankable movie stars, an actor who has built his reputation on intensity, charm, and fearless commitment, comes face to face with one of television's sharpest-tongued hosts, a woman unafraid to poke, prod, and stir the pot on live television? What happens when the unstoppable force meets the immovable object, not behind closed doors, not in a controlled interview room, but under the blinding lights of a daytime talk show watched by millions across the country? On that morning, the question wasn't hypothetical. It was real. And the answer unfolded live on The View, leaving jaws dropped, producers scrambling, and viewers across the nation glued to their screens, unable to look away. But before we pull you into this storm of tension, drama, and unfiltered truth, do this right now. Hit that subscribe button on Stage Storm, like this video, and drop a comment below. Because what you're about to witness is not just a celebrity interview. It is a battle of words, wills, and pride. And trust me, you'll want to be part of this conversation. The day began innocently enough. The set of The View buzzed with its usual electricity. Cameras swiveled into position, stage managers gave their countdowns, and the live studio audience, a mix of loyal fans and lucky ticket holders, chattered with anticipation. The polished table gleamed under the studio lights. Joy Behar sat in her usual seat, already trading jokes with her co-hosts, her wit as sharp as ever. To the casual eye, it looked like just another taping. But in the wings, Tom Cruise waited. And something about him was different. He wasn't the playful guest grinning ear to ear that audiences had grown used to over decades of press tours and promotional appearances. Today, there was a tightness in his jaw, a measured rhythm in his breathing. His eyes, blue, intense, unblinking, scanned the set as if assessing a mission. He wasn't here to coast. He was here to make a point. 30 seconds, a stagehand whispered, motioning him forward. Tom nodded, straightening his jacket. The energy around him was palpable. Crew members exchanged glances. Some sensed it, the undercurrent, the spark before the strike. And then it began. The theme music faded, applause swelled, and the hosts welcomed their guests with their usual warm enthusiasm. Tom walked onto the stage with his trademark smile, flashing that megawatt charm that had carried him through decades in Hollywood. The audience cheered wildly, some even standing to clap, cell phones discreetly raised to capture the moment. He shook hands with the panelists, gave a polite nod, and settled into his seat. For a few seconds, everything looked perfectly normal. Joy leaned toward him, her grin wide, her tone playful. Well, she began, the studio audience quieting just enough to hang on her words. We've got the one and only Tom Cruise here today. Still jumping off planes, still hanging off buildings, still making us all feel a little lazy in comparison. The audience laughed. Tom gave a small chuckle, but his eyes didn't crinkle with genuine amusement. Joy tilted her head, lowering her voice just slightly, sharpening her tone. But Tom, let's be real, you've also been making headlines again. And some folks out there say you've got a bit of a controlling streak. Want to clear that up for us? There it was. The first spark. A ripple moved through the audience, half laughter, half gasp. A few people clapped nervously, unsure whether to treat it as a joke or a jab. Tom's smile froze. He repeated her words slowly, almost tasting them. Controlling streak? Joy nodded, feigning innocence, but her eyes glittered. Yeah, you know. Intense. Maybe even scary. The word landed like a thunderclap. Scary. For a split second, the studio fell into suspended silence, like the intake of breath before a storm breaks. Even the co-hosts shifted in their chairs, their smiles faltering, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Tom's eyes narrowed, his jaw flexed. The smile evaporated. He leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but sharp, each syllable carrying weight. Scary? You know what's scary, Joy? Sitting here while someone reduces years of dedication, years of risk, commitment, and passion, to a punchline. That's what's scary. Not me. The audience gasped, some murmuring, others applauding instinctively. The tension was unmistakable now, tangible in the air like static before lightning. Joy raised her eyebrows, unfazed on the surface, though a flicker of surprise crossed her expression. She wasn't used to guests snapping back quite so quickly, quite so fiercely. "Oh, come on, Tom," she said with a smirk, turning slightly toward the audience as if inviting them in on the joke. "We're just being honest here. People talk. You know how it is. I'm just saying what's out there." Tom's voice deepened, steady, commanding. "No, Joy. What you're doing is making entertainment out of judgment. There's a difference." The audience let out another wave of reactions, some clapping, others groaning, a few voices calling out. One co-host interjected, her voice nervous. Okay, let's keep this light-hearted. We've got so much to talk about, your new film, your stunts." But Tom didn't budge. His gaze was locked on Joy, unblinking. The tension between them felt almost physical, a wire pulled taut and ready to snap. Joy leaned back slightly, folding her arms. "Tom, this is the view. People expect honesty here. If you've got nothing to hide, why get so defensive?" Tom's jaw tightened. He spoke slowly, deliberately, his voice carrying across the set. "I'm not defensive. I'm demanding respect. And that's something I think your audience deserves too, respect. Not the cheap shots you just tried to pass off as honesty." The studio was electric now. The audience erupted, applause clashing with murmurs, cheers blending with gasps. The crew in the control room scrambled, voices overlapping through headsets. "Do we cut to commercial? Do we ride this out? Stay on him, stay on him." The co-hosts exchanged glances, their smiles stiff, hands fidgeting nervously on the table. They knew something extraordinary was happening, something unscripted, unplanned, and unstoppable. And for Tom Cruise, it was only the beginning. The studio had become a pressure cooker. The air, once filled with laughter and polite applause, now hung heavy with anticipation. The audience leaned forward in their seats, some clutching their purses or folding their arms tightly, others with their mouths slightly open, unwilling to blink in case they missed something. A daytime talk show had suddenly transformed into a battleground, and no one knew where the fire would spread next. Joy Behar, seasoned, sharp, and never one to retreat, sat straighter in her chair. She crossed her arms with that trademark smirk still playing at her lips, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. She had pushed countless guests before, politicians and actors alike, and most had laughed, dodged, or squirmed under her questioning. But Tom Cruise was different. He wasn't dodging. He wasn't squirming. He was attacking back, and with precision. The producers in the control room were in chaos. Screens flickered with live feeds of each camera angle. A director barked, "Stay on Tom!" "No, cut to Joy! Get the wide shot, damn it, we need the audience reaction too!" Hands waved, switches were flipped, voices overlapped. Some wanted to cut to commercial immediately, others whispered urgently, "No, this is TV gold, let it ride, let it ride!" On set, Tom leaned in, elbows on the gleaming table, his voice steady but razor-sharp. "Joy, let me ask you something. Do you know what it's like to put your life on the line for your work? To jump from buildings, to fly jets, to spend months pushing yourself beyond what's comfortable, just to give audiences an experience they'll never forget?" Joy tilted her head, unfazed outwardly. "Tom, I sit at this table every day and ask tough questions to people who don't always like them. That's my risk." The audience chuckled nervously at her retort, some clapping, others groaning at the deflection. Tom didn't flinch. He leaned closer, his eyes burning. "That's not risk, Joy. That's provocation. There's a difference. And you know it." The silence after his words was deafening. The co-host seated beside Joy shifted in her chair, clearing her throat. "Let's not get too heated here. We all know Tom is passionate, and Joy is direct, and that's what makes conversations like this." But Tom raised a hand, not rudely, but firmly enough to silence the attempt at mediation. "No, let's not gloss over it. She called me scary. That's not a question, that's an accusation. That's putting a label on me in front of millions of people." Joy uncrossed her arms and leaned forward again, matching his intensity. Her tone hardened, less playful now, more defiant. Tom, people out there do call you intense. And intensity can come across as intimidating. That's not me making it up, it's public perception. You've got to own that. Tom let out a short, sharp laugh, shaking his head. Own it? I own the work I do, the risks I take, the dedication I put in. But I won't own your spin. You sit here and tell me to embrace being labeled as scary because it's convenient for your show? No, Joy. That's not honesty. That's exploitation. The audience roared, some clapping furiously, others booing. The noise swelled until it was nearly impossible to hear the co-host trying to cut in again. All right, let's try to keep this. But the duel was too strong now. Nothing could contain it. Joy's eyes narrowed, her voice rising above the noise. Exploitation? Tom, this is The View. We ask the questions people want answered. If you can't handle a little honesty, maybe you're in the wrong chair. Tom sat back slightly, his jaw tightening, then leaned forward once more, his voice low but booming with controlled fury. I've been in far worse chairs, Joy. Courtrooms, negotiations, sets where my safety was on the line. And do you know the difference between those moments and this? In those moments, at least there was honesty. Here, all I hear is mockery dressed up as truth. The audience broke into another wave of applause. The sound shook the studio walls. A woman in the back shouted, "You tell her, Tom!" while another voice countered, "Joy's just doing her job." The crowd was split, and that division only fed the fire. The co-host on Tom's other side tried once more to soften the blow. Maybe we should shift gears, talk about your new film, Tom. People are excited about it and… Tom turned his head slightly toward her, his face softening for just a moment. I'll talk about the film. But not until we acknowledge what just happened here. Because if we don't, then what's the point? Joy scoffed, shaking her head. Always the hero, huh? Always making it into a big stand. That's exactly what people mean when they say you're controlling. You can't just let the conversation flow, you have to seize it, bend it, dominate it. Tom's hand came down on the table, not in anger, but in firm punctuation, the sound echoing through the studio. No, Joy. I don't dominate. I defend. I defend myself, my work, my truth. And I won't apologize for that. Gasps. Applause. A man in the front row muttered audibly, "Wow." Another whispered to the person next to him, "I've never seen anything like this." The producers in the control room were beside themselves. One was pacing furiously, muttering, "This is going to be everywhere in an hour." Another was already drafting statements for the network in case of backlash. But none of that mattered on the stage. On the stage, the storm raged on. Joy leaned closer, lowering her voice, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "You're right, Tom. You're always right. Maybe we should just sit here quietly while you give us a lecture about passion." Tom met her gaze head on, his voice unwavering. "It's not a lecture. It's truth. And maybe it's uncomfortable because it cuts deeper than you expected. But don't confuse discomfort with intimidation." The audience erupted again, some rising to their feet, others shaking their heads. The set had transformed into an arena, each reaction from the crowd fueling the next exchange like gasoline poured onto flames. Joy exhaled loudly, throwing her hands up theatrically. "Well, congratulations, Tom. You've officially hijacked The View." Tom's eyes never left hers. "No, Joy. You tried to hijack me. I'm just taking it back." The audience thundered, their cheers deafening now. And in that moment, it was clear to everyone in the room, this wasn't just a clash. This was war. The air inside the studio was thick, as though the oxygen had been replaced with static. Every glance, every breath, every movement seemed amplified, weighted with tension. The audience sat frozen between awe and discomfort, their eyes darting from Joy Behar to Tom Cruise like spectators at a championship fight. And though both combatants sat at the same glossy table, it was clear now, this was no interview. This was a duel. Joy Behar adjusted herself in her chair, folding and unfolding her arms, trying to mask the ripple of unease running through her. She'd sparred with political figures who threw fire back at her, comedians who cut her down with jokes, even actors who stormed off mid-segment. But Tom Cruise wasn't storming off. He wasn't joking. He wasn't even playing defense. He was standing his ground, calm, controlled, relentless. She forced a chuckle, turning slightly toward the crowd as though their laughter might shift the power balance back to her side. "Well, folks," she said, her voice teetering on the edge of sarcasm, "we certainly hit a nerve today. Didn't know Tom came in here to audition for a courtroom drama." A scatter of laughter rolled through the audience, but it was hesitant, unsure. The crowd was divided now, and the cracks showed. Tom leaned forward, his eyes still locked on Joy. His voice was steady, but there was a fire beneath it. "You think this is funny, Joy? That's the problem. You throw words like darts, expecting people to laugh, to brush it off. But words matter. They shape perceptions. They wound reputations. And when you call someone scary, when you reduce everything they've done to a label, it sticks." His hand rested firmly on the table. Not slamming, not flailing. Just solid, deliberate, unyielding. The audience stirred. Someone shouted, "That's right!" Another hissed softly, "Oh, come on!" Joy smirked again, but her eyes flickered. She wasn't used to this kind of intensity. "Tom, you're an actor. You've lived your whole life in front of cameras. Public perception comes with the territory. You can't control how people see you." Tom's voice rose, not in anger, but in conviction. "I don't need to control how people see me. I just won't sit here while you paint me with your brush and call it honesty. Honesty is asking me why I do what I do. Honesty is asking why I keep pushing boundaries. Honesty is saying, 'Tom, why risk your life for your work?' That's a conversation. But calling me scary? That's lazy. That's cruel." The word cruel hung in the air like a verdict. The co-host beside Joy shifted uncomfortably. Maybe we should." But Tom wasn't finished. His eyes swept the table, then shifted past it, directly to the audience, directly into the camera lens. It was no longer a conversation with Joy. It was a declaration to everyone watching, in the studio and across the country. "I've spent decades putting myself on the line. Every stunt, every role, every challenge. It's not about ego. It's not about control. It's about giving something real to people. Something that takes their breath away, something that makes them believe in possibility. And do you know what it costs? It costs years of training, of preparation, of discipline. It costs broken bones, sleepless nights, and yes, intensity. But you know what it's never cost? Respect. Until today." The audience erupted into cheers and applause. Some stood, clapping wildly, swept up in the gravity of his words. Others sat stiff, exchanging uneasy glances, murmuring that he was going too far. Joy's smirk faltered. For the first time that morning, she seemed caught off guard. But she recovered quickly, narrowing her eyes. "So now I'm the villain? Because I asked a tough question? Give me a break, Tom. People are allowed to question you. That's not cruelty, that's accountability." Tom turned back to her, his tone softening slightly, though his conviction never wavered. "Accountability is fair. Criticism is fair. But reducing someone to a label, stripping away everything they've worked for and boiling it down to scary? That's not accountability. That's entertainment at someone else's expense." The audience reacted again, the energy in the room surging like waves in a storm. The co-host on the far side spoke up timidly. "Maybe what Tom's saying is that words carry weight, Joy. Maybe." Joy cut her off sharply. "Don't side with him just because he's Tom Cruise. I've been doing this for years. I know how to read a room." But she didn't. Not today. Because the room was no longer hers. Tom seized the opening, his voice rising again, filling the studio. "You talk about reading a room? Read this one. Listen to them. They're not cheering for cruelty. They're cheering for truth. They're cheering for passion. And you call that scary?" The applause thundered, filling every corner of the set. Some audience members were on their feet now, shouting, clapping, whistling. The division had reached its peak. Half the room rallied behind Tom, swept up in his righteous fire, while the other half sat stone-faced, bristling at the idea of a guest hijacking the show. Joy's face flushed. She leaned forward again, trying to cut through the noise. Tom, let's get real here. You thrive on this. You thrive on being larger than life, on having people hang on your every word. You don't like being challenged because it threatens that image. Tom's eyes flashed. He leaned closer, their faces now only feet apart, the tension almost unbearable. His voice dropped lower, sharper. You think this is about image? Joy, I've broken bones, I've risked my life, I've put myself through things most people wouldn't dream of, because it mattered. Because it gave people something to believe in. I don't care about image. I care about impact. And you just tried to turn that into a joke. The words struck like lightning. Joy opened her mouth to fire back, but for a moment, nothing came out. The silence was louder than any insult she could have delivered. The co-hosts glanced between them nervously, their hands gripping their mugs, their smiles frozen in place. The director in the control room barked, "Stay on him! Stay on Joy! Wide shot, wide shot!" The audience buzzed with murmurs, gasps, scattered applause. A woman in the front row shouted, "We love you, Tom!" while another muttered audibly, "Joy's just doing her job." Tom didn't back down. He turned his focus once more to the camera, his voice carrying like a sermon. This is the problem with the world we live in. People confuse cruelty with courage. They confuse mockery with honesty. And it's tearing us apart. We need to do better. We need to respect each other, even when we disagree. Especially when we disagree. The words landed like thunder rolling across the room. The audience responded with thunderous applause. Even some of those who had been silent before now clapped, swept up in the sheer force of his conviction. Joy leaned back, her arms crossed tightly, her jaw set. She forced a laugh, but it was hollow, brittle. Well, I guess Tom Cruise has given us all a sermon today. Maybe we should pass around a collection plate. Some in the audience laughed, but the laughter was scattered, uneasy. Tom didn't even flinch. He leaned in one last time, his voice calm, steady, unshakable. No, Joy. Not a sermon. Just the truth. And sometimes the truth makes people uncomfortable. The studio exploded in applause once more, the sound rattling the very walls. And at that moment, the balance had shifted. Joy Behar, master of control, the quick-tongued provocateur of the View, had been outmatched, not by anger or theatrics, but by sheer, unwavering conviction. The storm was still raging. And the world was watching. The applause still echoed when the red light on the main camera flicked off. The segment was over, but the energy inside the studio didn't fade. If anything, it intensified. The audience remained on their feet, buzzing, chattering, their voices rising in overlapping waves. Some were ecstatic, clutching their phones, already typing furiously. Others shook their heads, muttering that they'd seen a side of Tom Cruise they hadn't expected, one that thrilled or unsettled them depending on which side of the split they stood. The co-hosts shifted uncomfortably, offering stiff smiles as producers rushed in during the brief commercial break. Crew members darted across the floor, headsets crackling with panicked voices. "Get them separated," one producer hissed. "We need Tom off stage, now. Before this escalates." But Tom wasn't escalating. He sat tall in his chair, calm now, the fire still flickering in his eyes but contained, directed. He took a sip of water, never breaking his composure. Joy, on the other hand, busied herself with her mug, her lips pressed into a thin line, her hands betraying a faint tremor. Backstage, the chaos multiplied. Network executives shouted into phones, their words tumbling over each other. "Clips are already online," one barked. "It's trending." Another cursed under their breath, already drafting statements. Lawyers whispered about liability, while PR managers scribbled talking points. Meanwhile, the studio audience was dismissed row by row, but they didn't leave quietly. They buzzed like bees, phones glowing as they uploaded shaky videos, recounted the moment with breathless urgency. "Tom destroyed her," one fan gushed into her camera phone. "You guys, I was there. He literally shut her down." Another muttered the opposite. "Cruise was unhinged. This wasn't passion, it was ego." Within minutes, the storm had leapt from the studio walls onto the internet. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, hashtags blazed across feeds, hashtag Cruise vs. Behar, hashtag Tom Unleashed, hashtag The View Explosion. Clips circulated in endless loops, Joy saying, "Scary," Tom leaning forward with that fierce rebuttal, the audience erupting in gasps and cheers. News outlets picked it up before the show had even wrapped. Morning anchors scrambled to fill airtime, replaying the exchange with wide-eyed commentary. Some sided with Tom, applauding his defense of respect and passion. Others framed it as another example of his volatility, citing past interviews where his intensity had boiled over. Late-night comedians sharpened their knives. One joked, "Forget Mission Impossible, it looks like Tom just signed up for Mission Insufferable." Another quipped, "Some people say Joy Behar was brave. I say she was lucky she wasn't strapped to a plane when she called Tom scary." The divide deepened. Talk radio hosts fumed, podcast panels dissected every line, and comment sections swelled with thousands of voices arguing, mocking, praising. For every post calling Tom courageous, there was another painting him as unstable. For every defense of Joy's right to ask hard questions, there was another accusing her of cheap shots. But behind the spectacle, behind the memes and hashtags, the human toll revealed itself. Joy Behar retreated to her dressing room, slamming the door shut. A producer knocked softly, offering to debrief, but her muffled voice cut through. "Not now." Alone, she sat at her vanity, her reflection staring back. For the first time in years, she felt the sting of losing control. She'd always prided herself on holding her ground, on sparring with the best of them and walking away victorious. But this morning was different. This morning, Tom Cruise had turned the tables, and the burn of humiliation was impossible to ignore. Tom, meanwhile, was escorted to a private green room. His assistant hovered nearby, nervously checking messages. "It's everywhere already," she whispered, showing him her phone. "People are saying." Tom raised a hand, silencing her. He stood at the window, staring out at the bustling New York street below. Cars honked, people hurried by, oblivious to the storm that raged inside the building above them. His jaw was tight, but his breathing slow, deliberate. "Let them say what they want," he muttered. The truth spoke for itself. And indeed, the truth, or at least his version of it, was reverberating far beyond the studio walls. By evening, the confrontation had leapt from entertainment gossip into national discourse. Cable news panels debated it with the seriousness of a political scandal. Columnists penned think pieces. When passion meets provocation, the ethics of daytime TV, Tom Cruise and the weaponization of intensity. Some argued it was a wake-up call about the blurred line between journalism and spectacle. Others dismissed it as another celebrity meltdown feeding America's endless appetite for drama. Fan forums lit up like wildfire. One thread read, "Tom defended himself like a boss. That's why he's a legend." Another countered, "No, he proved exactly why people call him unhinged." Comment after comment poured in, thousands deep, a digital echo chamber of passion and rage. Even Hollywood weighed in. Some actors quietly applauded him, texting private messages of support. Others rolled their eyes publicly, warning that he'd crossed a line. An anonymous director told a trade magazine, "This is why studios hesitate. Tom is brilliant, but when that intensity spills off screen, it's a risk." For Joy, the backlash was brutal. Headlines skewered her. "Joy Behar pushes too far? Cruelty or courage?" Clips of her smirk replayed endlessly, contrasted with Tom's fiery monologues. Fans flooded her social media with comments, some defending her, many attacking her. "You were out of line," one wrote. "He destroyed you," said another. But for Tom, the fallout was complicated. Yes, he had defenders. Yes, his words had struck chords with millions. But the whispers grew louder too, volatile, egotistical, dangerous to interview. And yet, one thing was undeniable. Nobody would forget it. That day on The View became more than a segment. It became a cultural flashpoint. A moment frozen in time where two powerful personalities collided, either willing to yield, and the sparks that flew lit up the world. Weeks later, the ripples still spread. The clip had surpassed millions of views online. Memes still circulated, some mocking, some admiring. Joy carried the sting into every new broadcast, more cautious now, though never admitting it. Tom moved on to his next project, but the shadow of that morning followed him into every interview, every headline. It was more than just a heated exchange. It was a mirror held up to a society that thrives on confrontation, that devours conflict like oxygen. It was proof of how quickly an interview could turn into a battlefield, how easily words could ignite a storm. And through it all, one truth rang clear. When Tom Cruise and Joy Behar clashed on live television, it wasn't just a moment. It was a reckoning.